Let's talk some more about zero tolerance. What does it mean? Zero tolerance means that even one incident of sexual abuse is too many. Under Prea, every facility is required to have a written policy that clearly states that it does not tolerate sexual abuse and sexual harassment. And that means abuse by inmates as well as by staff, as we've already discussed. We'll talk about definitions some more later on in the video. But zero tolerance is about more than just a written policy. It's about building a culture where sexual abuse and sexual harassment are simply not permitted. It means that inmates and staff understand what sexual abuse and harassment are and how to detect it. It means that inmates and staff are able to report safely, that perpetrators are held accountable, and that leadership takes every single case of sexual abuse and sexual harassment seriously. Bottom line, sexual abuse and sexual harassment are not tolerated at this facility. No matter what you may have done, sexual abuse and sexual harassment are not part of the penalty.
The Prea standards require all facilities to have policies and practices in place to keep inmates safe, and to make it possible for them to get help if they've been sexually abused or harassed. Facilities must make housing decisions to keep inmates safe. If you are sexually abused, you can get free medical treatment and counseling. And remember, the standards cover inmate against inmates and staff against inmate sexual abuse.
So far, we've been using a lot of terms and phrases like sexual abuse, sexual harassment, sexual staff misconduct, but what's it all mean? And how's it different? So here to help me is Matthew, a former inmate and Prea peer educator. Sexual harassment is repeated and unwanted sexual advances, requests for sexual favors. It can be comments, gestures, or actions, degrading or disrespectful remarks about someone's body parts or their sizes, and obscene languages or gestures.
If another inmate constantly makes comments about how your body's appearance is when you're undressing or taking a shower, that could be considered as sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment also includes insults or negative comments about someone's sexual orientation or their gender identity.
If a staff member calls a transgender woman a he, she, or makes rude or sexual comments about someone that's gay or someone whom they think is gay, that would definitely be considered sexual harassment.
Now let's move on to sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is any sexual activity that is not wanted or agreed to. Inmates can never agree to sexual activity with staff. Sexual abuse involves penetration of one person by another without consent. This includes penetration of any of your body parts by someone else's body parts or objects. But that's not all. Sexual abuse involves intentional touching, either directly or through clothing, of your private parts, but this excludes contact that's incidental during a physical altercation. Abusers can be inmates, staff, volunteers, or contractors.
If your cellmate touches you while you're sleeping, or if you're heavily sedated by any sort of medication, that would definitely be sexual abuse.
Abusers may trick, coerce, or pressure someone by threats of violence or other harm.
When a new inmate arrives at a facility, they don't usually have money for commissary, or their money hasn't followed them from a previous institution. So another inmate will offer to provide them with commissary or even tobacco as a favor. But then later on down the road, they'll demand payback, and knowing that you cannot pay with money, they'll demand sexual favors instead.
In addition, the law states that inmates cannot, under any circumstances, consent to any sexual activity with a staff member. So any time that a staff member and an inmate engage in sexual activity, it is considered sexual abuse. It is illegal, even if an inmate thinks that it's in a romantic relationship.
During a pat search, if an officer presses his or her body up against you, or touches you and makes comments about how your body feels, that would definitely be staff sexual misconduct. Also, there's something called voyeurism. Voyeurism is when a staff member invades your privacy by watching you shower or use the toilet or dress and undress when it's not part of their job duties. And because staff members should never undress in front of you, it is always staff sexual misconduct when a staff member exposes their private parts to you.
The legal term for agreeing to sexual activity is consent. Consent means when someone is completely willing and is able to freely agree to be part of the activity. If someone doesn't agree or is not able to agree because he or she is asleep, unconscious, drugged, afraid, or feeling threatened, or really doesn't understand what's going on, then he or she has not consented.
Because staff members have authority over inmates, sexual activity between a staff member and an inmate can never truly be consensual and is always against the law, even when the inmate thinks that they're consenting. While consensual sex between inmates is not sexual abuse and is not covered by Prea guidelines, it is also against institutional policy.
So remember, abuse is something that is not agreed to. The National Prea Standards definition section defines sexual abuse of an inmate by another inmate as contact between the penis and vulva or penis and anus, contact between mouth and penis, vulva or anus, penetration, intentional touching. Sexual abuse by a staff member against an inmate is described as contact between the penis and the vulva or the penis and the anus, contact between the mouth and any body part with the intent to abuse, arouse, or gratify sexual desire, penetration, contact intended to abuse, arouse, or gratify sexual desire, display of genitalia, buttocks, or breasts in the presence of an inmate. Voyeurism, which is particular to staff misconduct, is an invasion of privacy of an inmate by staff for reasons unrelated to official duties. Sexual harassment is repeated and unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors or verbal comments, gestures, or actions of a derogatory or offensive sexual nature by one inmate directed toward another, and repeated verbal comments or gestures of sexual nature to an inmate by a staff member, contractor, or volunteer, including demeaning references to gender, sexually suggestive or derogatory comments about body or clothing, or obscene language or gestures.